Okay. Hi, everyone. Hope sound is okay. Okay. I'm Peter. I'm a developer at TMS Software for a little more than 17 years now. So I devoted my life and the last 7 years exactly on building out FNC. So today's webinar is going to cover our latest addition to the FNC family, which is the TMS FNC DataGrid. So before we get started, I want to thank you for following this webinar, and let's get started. So I'll give you a brief overview on what we are going to cover today. So first, we are going to briefly go to the features of the data grid. Then I'll explain why we chose the data grid as a new development. So it's important to know that we already have, I think, 2 or 3 grids right now, and it's a new addition. So we'll explain how and why we are choosing the new development to be future-proof. Okay, then we'll go through the class structure. So it's important to also know that we learned from all the FNC developments we've done in the past. And I think it's important to know that we chose a different class structure. Okay, then I think we are going to go through a set of demos. There will be some live coding. And then we are going to go through some questions and answers. So if you have some questions during this webinar, feel free to ask them. There's a separate tab in the Web Academy that you can use. So I will try to answer them as best as possible, but I will focus on the answers at the end of the session. Okay. So without further ado, let's go to the features topic. So the data grid is actually a successor of the FNC grid. One of the main or major features of the data grid is the master detail. So there was a lot of feedback from the FNC grid back in the days that we collected, and we wanted to make sure that the next generation data grid or the FNC data grid has the new feature, which is called the master detail views, and it's in connection with the data binding. Okay, so next up will be the controls themselves. We also heard a lot of feedback from you with in relation to the controls, or exactly real controls themselves, which was important to add them dynamically. So we also focused on having that as a main feature of the data grid. Okay, so have been a lot of thought into grouping as well. So the data grid is capable of grouping on an advanced level. So we have the ability to group with one column. We have the ability to group with multiple columns. In relation with grouping, there's also customizable calculations. So not only in column, but also at row level. So it's very important. I will show that in a later topic here in this webinar, which will cover multi-column grouping with customizable calculations. We also focused on efficient memory management. So it's important also to know that we redesigned the data grid from scratch, focusing on the memory and the the memory footprint and the efficiency of handling that, which comes with increased performance. Okay, so the performance and the memory has been increased compared to the previous developments we have done in FNC. Then, of course, as you would expect from having a data grid, is also import export, and well, at least you can manipulate your data, import it and export it to various file formats, including CSV, PDF, and also JSON. Okay, then without editing, a grid is view only, of course, which would be limited. We also focused on having a wide range of in-place editors throughout the grid, and I will focus on them as well today. So let's get started. Okay, so important to know is why we chose to have the new development, which is actually, we used a new term, the next generation grid, and not having extensions on the existing FNC grid. So there are a couple of complex and new features, including master detail, multi-column grouping, filtering and sorting in connection with data binding. And it's important to know that we revised the TMS FNC grid structure, and that was not sufficient to be future-proof, to have complex changes and features like that. Okay, so that's the first reason that we actually chose to develop a new component. Next is that we always try to avoid breaking changes. So people that have existing applications which has or have been using FNC for quite some time will know that we try to avoid it. At some point, of course, if there's a property change, naming, conventions, etc., we try to change them accordingly, but most of the time we try to avoid them. Okay, so with the data grid, we also chose to not force anything on behalf of the user, and breaking changes is something that we try to avoid at all costs. And then last but not least, choices. So it's important that you as a customer have a choice. You can keep working with the TMS FNC grid, and the application will still be running as smooth as possible. We will be focusing on maintenance, bug fixes, and improvements in several areas of FNC grid. But the next generation grid, the TMS FNC DataGrid, will be the one that actually will be future-proof. So what I mean with that is that we redesigned the structure and put in a lot of effort to accommodate the feature requests that we received from you as a customer. So we will not force anything on the distribution, on the component structure of FNC grid. So for now, they will exist next to each other. And that's important to know, that at all times you have a choice. Okay. So a little bit about the structure. So as I mentioned, the data grid is redesigned from scratch. We have put a lot of thought and effort into it. Important to know is that we actually separated the data layer, the visual layer, and the core layer of the grid into abstract classes. So that's different from all the other FNC components that we have designed until now. So you will see at the left-hand side, there's the core layer, which actually defines how the grid should look like. Then we have the data layer, which of course speaks for itself. It's the layer that captures your data, that manipulates and transforms your data. And then, of course, without a renderer, which is responsible for visualizing your data and the data structure, as well as all the calculations that happen into a visual component. Then we have the cell layer, which is actually being fed into the renderer. This is something that might be ringing bells to you for the FNC grid. It's the same approach. You can customize the cell to your likings, and the renderer will use that class to define the visual aspect of the cell. Then this is all abstraction. Eventually, we capture all the layers into the visual component, which is called the grid. Okay, then the grid is responsible for handling the end-place editing and communicates back and forth between the abstraction layer and the data layer to save and manipulate the data. Of course, it's an FNC component, so we still have the ability to target VCL, FMX, and web frameworks. It's important to know that whether or not the naming of the component is not related to any of these frameworks, it's still important to know that all these frameworks are targeted. So especially the VCL framework, which is coexisting with all the other default components in VCL. So you can just drop it on the form in a VCL application, and you can combine any kind of VCL component as if you would design it entirely purely in VCL. Okay. So next up will be the class structure and the naming of the classes. So you see that the naming scheme is actually starting with TTMS FNC, which is common for all FNC components. And then the important key word is data. So it might be confusing with the FNC grid for now, but I assume that when you search for the data grid, it will pop up in the tool palette with those naming scheme. Okay, so the abstract classes which form into the data grid will not be visible, of course, in the tool palette because they are classes. They can be instantiated at runtime. I will show a sample later on. The TTMS FNC data grid is the visual component that then encapsulates all the abstract layers and is capable of being dropped on the form and will show as if it would be any other control. So a bit more technical, that is how the classes are designed. It's only a short or a small code snippet, but it's just to give you an example on how the core classes and the other classes are structured. So for the core class is responsible for calculating and managing column and row structures. So as you can see, the core class defines how the column count and row count are defined, if a cell is visible, etc. Also has the ability to define the start and end row of the visible range, but that will be communicated with the renderer, which we'll see in a couple of slides. Then next, we have the data layer. So the data layer is responsible of manipulating your data. You can also use the data layer separately from the component itself. So there's also a live example, like I said in the beginning of the webinar, that I will focus on and show you how you can use the data grid data layer to transform your data without having a need for a visual component. So you can see here there's the ability to load from CSV data as well as being able to sort, filter, etc. Then, as you saw in the structure, we have the renderer. So the renderer is able to do the interactions like editing, scrolling, selection, etc. So we also have the ability to add grids and grids, the ability to detect cells when you hover over with the mouse, defines how the cell should look like with the cell appearance, and also has convenient columns collection at design time to further define how the grids should look like. Okay. So I see a small question that I want to pick in. So import and export from JSON is should be possible. So maybe we can go through that at the end of the session. Next up, we have the DataGrid cell. So remember from the structure, that's the class that defines how the cell should look like at a cell level. So where the renderer actually has properties to define how the cell should look like in terms of appearance and layout, the DataGrid cell defines how the cell should look like. So the cell can contain checkboxes, radio buttons, other controls, defines the width and the height, defines the text. So you can, that's a base class here. You can inherit from that and define your own DataGrid cell class to your likings. There's a lot of functionality included already, so feel free to explore that whenever you are feeling for it. Then the TMS FNC DataGrid class, which is the visual component that bundles all the abstract classes. So we have the core data and renderer, which is then being implemented in the TMS FNC DataGrid component. Actually serves as a wrapper or a host to be able to communicate to the abstraction layer with scrolling mouse and keyboard handling. Also has the ability to display the in-place editor. Closely adopts the FNC techniques. So FNC techniques are actually focusing on customizability and custom drawing. So there's a lot of events, as you might see in other FNC components, about the ability to customize the look and feel of the component if something as a default experience of out of the box experience does not immediately work for you, then you can use all kinds of events to customize that. So it's actually adopts the FNC techniques as we know from all the other FNC components until now. We want to focus on design time user experience. So we are currently investigating, and we had some success by with the FMX design time experience. It opens up a lot of possibilities. So as you will notice in the first demo, you will see at the left-hand side design time panel, which can be used to interact with. So we are planning on extending the design time user experience with wizards and more. Okay. So if there are any questions up until now, you can feel free to post them in the questions chat. So I will now focus on showing some demos. So first up will be the basic show, the basic demo. It's actually starting from scratch, showing how the DataGrid exists and how you can interact with it. Okay, then the second demo will focus on showing how you can add controls to cells. So it's a very important feature that I want to show you. Filtering, of course, is key to work with the grid and with your data. Multi-column grouping is a new feature that we have added that I want to show you as well. Then I will focus on some live coding, which will show how to transform, load, and export data without the need for an actual visual component on the form. And last but not least, the improved and master detailed database binding that we focused on is going to be the last demo of this session. Okay, so let's start with the first one. So after installing the TMS FNC Webpack, so we already have, we ran a beta for a couple of weeks, I think 1 or 2 months. We ran a beta, and the component was integrated in the latest, well, I think if you have an active license, you will be able to play with it. So if you type in data, you will see there's the data grid. Okay, so first of all, we have the data grid component, which is actually the one that's being that's implementing the all the abstract classes. And then we also have, and that's the equivalent of the other FNC grid, the PDF print IO, the Excel export and import, and the adapter to be able to connect with any kind of data set. Okay, so let's start with the data grid. So we can drop it on the form, and you will see at the left-hand side, we have a design time panel, which is able to enable or disable some basic functionality, as well as load some sample file or data if you want to visualize that at design time. Important to know is that the data will not be persisted in the form. We will look for ways to do that optionally, of course, so we can set things up at design time. For now, the persistence of the data is only, or the visualization of the standard data, the default data is only loaded once when you drop it on the form. And that's the same with all the other FNC components, just to give you an example on how the grid should or can look like when you drop it on the form. Okay. Important to know is that we have here on the left side the columns collection. So as soon as you start working with the grid, you have the ability to add columns which will be able to set properties on a column level basis. So for example, here you can say, okay, give me, for example, for the first column, give me the checkbox control. Okay, so you can do that on a column level, which enables you to configure the grid without the need for programmatic access. Of course, everything is able or possible by programmatically interacting with the grid as well. Okay, so the data grid is now being dropped on the form. Let's say we want to load some data. Okay, we just go to the form create and start accessing our data grid. Important to know is that the distinct or the difference between the FNC grid is that the FNC grid stores the data in string format, while the data grid stores the data in the t-value type, which is capable of storing your data as is. So that's important to know that that's the capability of the data grid. The ability to transform your data is also possible by using the formatting capabilities either at column level or at cell level. For this session, we will not focus on it, but I will just show you how the data will be shown in the grid when you just add it as is. So for now, we can do, well, let's first clear the grid. Then we can set the row count, for example, to 10. Okay. We also have the column count, of course, which can be set to 5, or alternatively, we can use the add column or columns.add, which has the same effect as immediately setting the columns. So remember that at design time, you have access to the columns. So the columns collection can be used here directly as a programmatic way of adding columns. So then we know that we have the cells property which maps on the data layer. We can, for example, set here a number. Okay, then we can also, for example, set in another cell a string. If we start that, you will see that the data will be shown in the grid, and it's also possible to, of course, edit it to your likings. Okay, so maybe I'll focus a little bit of attention on the formatting. So because it's important to know. So we added data to the actually the third column, which has the index of 2. The ability to format your data. For example, let's say we have a comma-separated float value that we want to display with 2 decimals. Okay, then we can do the following. So we just go to columns. We go to the same index. We add the setting. So important to know is also that if I enable this at design time, for example, I have this column and I want to enable any kind of properties, the settings property is important it's important to be aware that as long as this is not set, it will not have effect on cell level, because you will also be able to format and define how the cell should transform the data at cell level or via events. So at design time, if you set any property, it will automatically add the required setting. So for example, if I change my in-place editor to, for example, a color picker, it added the required settings to take over at column level. Okay. So for the formatting, we actually have the settings here. We can transform the formatting here, but we can also do that programmatically. So then we actually just add the setting, which is the formatting setting here. And then we can actually format our value with the format capabilities of Delphi. So we have another property to set, which is the type. And that is actually the number. Okay. So if we start that, if all goes well, we now have, I'm not sure if it's visible for you. I'll increase the font size a bit. We also have a global font to change for the entire grid. So we can set it to 1.4. Okay, and now you will see here we have 5.35, which is now your number here being formatted with the 2 decimal separators. Okay, so that's a base introduction on how the grid works. It's you can do a lot of things with it, of course, but just as a basic introduction, how you can play around with the grid, how you can access the columns, how things set up with the cells, which is important to know that the data is being saved as a t-value. Okay, so next up, we are going to go through a set of demos, starting with the cell controls. Okay, so I will first show the cell controls demo. Okay, as you can see, we have set of buttons here at the top left. We also have some progress bars here at the left side. We have checkboxes and radio buttons, and we also have a grid within a grid that's also fully editable. So you can interact with the grid and then scroll with your grid, and the controls just follow the cells. So how to set this up? There's the possibility to have the controls property. So in the same way as you would access the cells property, you have the controls property. So for this sample, we created the T button, which has the left text. We assigned it to the controls property at this coordinate here, and then set the align. Okay, so we also have other control-specific properties, such as the width, the alignment, etc. So it's possible to assign your own control, whatever your control might look like. It will be hosted in the cell and scroll along when you scroll into the grid. Okay, so a bit further down, we have the progress bars. So we have built-in support for adding progress bars to a specific cell, or the ability to add progress bars to a full column. So for now, we had, for the sample, we added the data progress bar on this specific cell coordinate, and then tied it to the cell value. So remember, from FNC grid or from ADV string grid, we actually have the int property, which returns the value as an integer. If we set that and we add the data progress bar, the progress bar will be connected to this value. We also have a normal progress bar that does not connect to the value if you want to use the progress bar separately from the cell value. Then further down, we have the checkbox column and the radio button column. And we also connected to a Booleans property in the same way as we connected to the int property. Okay, so eventually that leads into the demo that shows the cell controls. So maybe I'll pick in for the question on the web framework. So we have support for VCL, FMX, and web. So we target those three frameworks for now. The goal is to have the same experience on all three. So right now we have dataset improvements on the website, and it fully supports the web framework. So to answer your question, yes, it supports the TMS web core framework as is it would support the VCL and FMX framework. So next up, we have the filtering demo. So again, I will first show you the result and then go through the code. So the filtering demo, you might immediately see that we have some grouping enabled. So here you will see the grouping on the country and the brand of this data. Okay, we can interact with it, etc. That's also nothing new, but the thing to focus on is that you will be able to group on multiple columns. Then we can start typing the brand name. So let's say we want to pick out Audi. You will see that it filters out the values as you type them. Okay, the same applies to the price. We can go to, for example, we want to be larger than 100,000. Not sure if that's okay. Okay, so the price, I'm not sure what is going on with the price, but you also have, if you filter on the grid, you will see that here the filter is applied. Okay, you can click on it. We also extended the filter dialog to be more have more functionality, as filtering is can be complex. So we have the ability to add controls here as well. So right now we can focus our attention on what we want to filter. Okay. So as soon as you have done filtering, you can just clear the filter with a simple button here, and then continue the work in the grid. Okay. So to show the code, it's actually relatively simple. So what we've done is we loaded the comma-separated file cars. I'm sure you're all aware, well aware with the CSV file we typically use for demo purposes. So we just define the headers, and then we group on the column 8 and 1, which corresponds with country and with brand. So the grouping feature is here extended with multiple columns. Okay, so that's how to set this up. And for the filtering, it's also being typical for grids, is that you can set the column and then the condition. So the condition will accept wildcards and mathematical operators as well. So what I want to mention in that area is that we also have the DataGrid blog series. So let me quickly show what I mean. So for the blog series, we also had released a new blog on the filtering and sorting capabilities right now. So you can follow through what is required to set things up. So it's number 3 for now. There's a lot of blogs coming after that. It's a kind of a guide to start working with the DataGrid. So feel free to follow this as well. Each Tuesday, we will release a new blog about the capabilities of the DataGrid. Okay, so next up we have multi-column grouping. So we already showed multi-column grouping a bit in the filtering demo, but for the multi-column grouping, I also wanted to show how to set things up with in relation with the calculations. So you will see here that we loaded again a data file, which is containing data in multi-columns. Okay, we focused on grouping the first 3 columns at level 1, and we also grouped another column on level 2. So that's also possible. So not only you can multi-group on one level, you can also multi-group on several levels. Typical or special for this demo is that we also used calculations. So here, for example, you will see the count for the subgroup and then the count for the main group. Of course, it's both 1 because there's only 1 entry in this group. For this, for example, you will see here we have the subcount 3. We have the subcount 11 for the next group, and the 2 groups together combined has a count of 14 for the main group. Okay, it's fully interactable. You can also expand collapse on multiple levels and filter and sort throughout your data. Okay, so it's very powerful that you can do that. We focused our attention on the multi-column group feature. Let's briefly go through the code. So to set things up, we have our train comma-separated file, which contains the data. Then we set some properties related to interaction, such as the filtering and sorting. Here is the most complex code, which is actually the code required to group on multiple levels. So we have the columns that are grouped together on level 1, and then we have the second column that is being used to group on level 2. Okay, so so that's important to know that we have actually the create group info function to allow you to specify which columns that that are going to be used to group, as well as the ability to sort and further fine-tune which group options you want to apply when you are grouping on multiple levels. So I remember what I said in the beginning of the webinar, focusing on the features. So the features that I overlooked was the multi-column grouping feature has the ability to specify column calculations. Of course, column calculations are also possible without grouping, but for grouping, we focused our attention on having calculations for each group. So here, for example, you have the code to specify how calculations are transformed or how they are used for group calculations. So you specify, okay, I need a group calculation. What do I want as a mathematical action? So we chose the count, but you also have other options as well. Okay. Then with anonymous callbacks, we can specify formatting, and we can also use our own calculations if that's required. So we have specified some calculations here for the multi-column grouping demo. All the demos are available in the distribution. So if you install the TMS FNC away pack, you will also be able to see the demos as they are here in the group. Okay, so one thing to maybe mention as well is important to notice that we are also having the ability to specify your own group. So for example, if the data of the group is not sufficiently determined or formatted in this way that you can group on the data itself, you can also specify your own group. So maybe I will show the demo again that you can see what I mean. The age group, for example, here is the age group 0 to 10. If we go a bit down, for example, we have the age group 20 to 30, etc. So the ages are all scrambled throughout the CSV file. We first sort them and then we specify our own group. So how do we do that? We have the on custom group event, and then we specify, okay, so that's our data. We could transform it to an integer. Then we specify the formatting of the group, which is a string. And then all the data related to that group will be formatted in this way. Okay, the first two are actually being reused as the group as is with the default grouping capabilities. We just added an SVG to show or to format the heading of the group here. Okay. So, of course, you can also export this to PDF as is, and there's also capabilities of exporting this with settings related to cell appearance as well. So let's go over to some live coding. So our next example will focus on how to set up the TTMS FNC DataGrid data layer. So what I did for now for preparation is just some paths. So remember what I said is that we have the TTMS FNC DataGrid renderer, the DataGrid data layer, and the core layer. So you can also use these classes to immediately access your data. So let's start by using the DataGrid data layer. We also have to, of course, add our units. Okay, so we can just create this class. free them at the end of our method. So what we can do is then load CSV data or JSON data. So for this sample, I prepared the train sample. The food data sample. So we just use the paths I defined. Okay, so that's just going to work with the data will be in the data grid layer, and we can then transform it and save it back to another output file, for example. So we have the okay, so we can do it like this. This, of course, doesn't make any sense because you just import and export your data as is. Okay, so the data is just being imported and exported again. Okay, so for example, we can then apply some filtering. So let's say we just want to apply filtering on the let me briefly look at the data again. So for example, we have the category here. So let's say we want to only export the category which has cookies. Okay, so we can then look for the column with the category. Which is actually, let me check again, the fifth column. So it's 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the fourth column. So we just add the fourth column. We also have convenience functionality to transform your first header to the index. So I will show that when I use the renderer, which has column access as well. So we have the fourth column. Okay, then we need to specify the condition. Okay, I want cookies. Okay, and then the operation is if you add multiple filters, then you can specify the operation for in between multiple filters. For example, you could or the filter or and the filter, etc. Okay, so we need to apply the filter, of course. And then if we export the DataGrid data, okay, we only see the cookies. So this is the exported CSV with the filter applied. So let me look at the time. Okay, so I prepared the data export as a demo. I see that we are running short on time, so let's just show the demo in action. So this will export the data to a PDF file, which has some customization in the drawing area, and focuses its attention on filtering the data that you imported, and then you can export it as is. So the data, the code for that is actually creating the renderer. So you have two options. If you want to export to PDF, you need the renderer. If you want to just export to any kind of file format which does not have visual properties, you can just use the data. So if you use the renderer, you have the same capabilities as the data layer, but you can specify your own settings. So here we have the filter options that I mentioned. We have the convenience method that transforms the header or the column naming into the index. Then we apply the filter. We also sort it on the city column header, and then we exported it to the PDF. So this code here is actually all you need to transform your data without the need to drop DataGrid on the form. Okay, so it's important to know that you can use these classes as is. Especially, you can also use them in a console application or a service as well, because they do not require visual dependencies or libraries like any other visual component needs. So last but not least, before we go to the questions and answers, I want to show you the last demo of the session, which is the master detail demo. Okay, so the master detail demo is just loading the data in the grid, and has the ability to expand and collapse your record, which is then showing the detailed the data of the detail grid. The detail grid is connected to the detail dataset, as if you would set up the master detail relationship in any kind of dataset demo or application. It's just the same. You can just specify, okay, this is my detail control, which is in this case a grid. And you also have the ability to expand, collapse, or export to PDF, navigate, etc. So as soon as I click on the next one, it will of course collapse, because you only have one record active at a time. So as soon as you click, you will see other data in your data grid. Okay, so briefly going through the code for that. Actually, there's a lot of design time stuff involved, but little to no code. So the only thing that I have is just some export code, and that's it. Okay, so the data grid here, which is the detail control, is then hooked to the TMS FNC DataGrid database adapter. So you can see that here. Okay, and then other than that, you just connect the database adapters to the respective DataGrid components, and you just set up the dataset connection as you would do in any kind of database application. You have the first table, you have the second table, which then sets up the master detail relationship, like you would see here in the property inspector. Okay. So I want to show you, I still have some time. I want to show you how you can set this up with another control, or at least with the ability, the flexibility to specify your own design or your own component structure. That's what I wanted to try to say. PowerPoint, okay, and then we have the custom detail demo, which actually is the same demo as you saw earlier. Okay, so here we have designed our own panel, and it has the navigator and the data grid component inside as a detail control. We just set things up in the exact same way. We have the panel as a detail control, okay? And then if we start the demo, okay, that's not going to work. Let me quickly check. Okay. Okay, I'm not sure what's going on here, but okay, I think we can conclude. But so the detail control is actually hooked to the data grid database adapter, and that is the thing that will be shown in the detail. Well, if you expand, or if you expand the master row, you will see the panel with the data grid, inside set up as you would do here at design time. Okay, so okay, I think we can conclude this webinar with some questions and answers. So let me briefly look through the answers or the questions. Okay, so there's one question about customizing the button in the grid. So okay, so you can add any type of control in the grid as you want. So you can add T button. If you can customize T button, you can of course change the color. You can also use custom buttons such as the FNC toolbar button or any kind of button. In the VCL UI pack, there's also ADV glow button and other type of buttons that you can fully customize. So you can add any type of button you want. So the answer is yes, you can customize the color because it's actually a real control being hosted in the cell. Okay. So okay, so yeah, we focused. The next question is next generation DataGrid the right tool to work with FireDAC? So we focused our attention on FireDAC to sort and filter. So we have built-in filtering and sorting out of the box, so that's not requiring any code to set up. So the answer is yes, you can use FireDAC because FireDAC handles the separate implementation of the service you want to use. So or the database, the kind of the database is actually handled by FireDAC. So we use FireDAC, or we support FireDAC alongside the client dataset to be able to handle the data scrolling and loading it, also editing it, and being able to filter and sort directly on the dataset. Okay, so that's the answer for the last question. So there's another question: the DataGrid compatible with the new 64-bit CLang compiler? So the code is just RTL based, and then the visual layer are VCL and FMX frameworks. So the answer is yes, we are focusing our attention on TMS Smart Setup for compiling to the new compiler. So that should also work for the new compiler for C++. Okay, so I'm not sure if there are any more questions. So if there are no more questions, okay, so the grid has a virtual mode. Let me show that quickly. So of course, at design time, there's just some sample data. If you set up the rows and you clear it, okay, what happens is it just allocates the amount of cells required for scrolling. Okay, there's no data. And then you can just use the same events. We try to have some similarities to TMS FNC grid, and you have the onGetCellData event here, which is then being called to set your own data, which is again, it's actually a wrapper type for being the VCL and for supporting VCL and web frameworks and FireMonkey framework, but it actually has the T value type. So you can add here whatever data you want. So that will be called on demand. So as if you scroll, it will be loaded on demand. So yes, so the answer is yes on the virtual mode. Does it support VCL teams? So yes, we focused on VCL teaming. the default themes for now. We are doing work right now to also support FireMonkey premium styles as well as the VCL styles built in the application. The examples are actually already available if you install the TMS FNC UI pack. So the UI pack here has a demo folder if you install it, and in the FMX subfolder you have DataGrid, and here are all the samples available. So the basic ones are all covered, as well as the more advanced, such as multi-column grouping and the non-visual data export, as well as database filtered, database focused demos. Okay. Okay, I need to filter or search with an editor and header for all column. Okay. Yeah, so in the same way as you would add a control, you can add a control to the header. So of course it's currently not built in, but you can specify if you have an edit, for example, you can just add it here. Okay, we say, okay, I want to have the second column, the first row, we have our edit here. Okay, and then the edit is here available. You can start typing on it and then assign events for filtering. Okay, so I want to thank you for your attention. I hope you learned how to interact and how to work with the DataGrid. So feel free to download the TMS FNC UI pack. Currently, we are finishing the beta, and tomorrow we'll release version 1.0. So feel free to also follow the blog series. So there's a lot of content that's coming up. If you have any questions, also use the support center or direct email, of course. So let's conclude the webinar, and thank you everyone for following the webinar, and I wish you a very good day.